welcome to the Resilient Mental State Podcast. I'm Kyle Shepard, husband, father, and resilience instructor of over 10 years. Join me as I sit down with writers, independent thinkers, and extraordinary individuals to discuss their unique wisdom through the lens of resilience. Resilience is the ability to effectively manage and recover from stress. It is essential to endure and grow from life's inevitable adversities. Resilience is a skill that can be trained.
Peter Maguire, if I were to properly introduce you, I would probably talk and jab on for about 30 minutes and everything I've gotten to learn about you over the past few years. So I'm going to instead start with just saying how I first learned your name, which is from the book that is sitting behind me, Breathe, A Life in Flow, about the all-time great Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter, Rickson Gracie, which you helped write that book with him. I think it was released about almost 5 years ago now. So I read that book shortly after its release. It is still to this day. It's obviously not a jiu-jitsu per se book. It's about a jiu-jitsu great. It's his memoir, but it's more about the lessons on the mat and how he applied it to his life and adversity. Themes like alignment of mind, body, and soul, and so many takeaways that I've experienced myself over the past 9 years in jiu-jitsu on how it's transformative. Some of these domains that we enter, the lessons that we can take off of it for other unknowns in life. So I still buy that book for friends, refer others to it, and you two have since released another book called Comfort in Darkness, which was equally as good. So I learned about your name about 5 years ago when I read that book. I then saw you on one of my favorite podcasts, Jocko's podcast, which was about a year after that release back in 2022. And that is when I already knew who's this cool writer helping Rickson Gracie, this black belt underneath of him. But I learned about your life. And holy shit, brother, I've gotten to know you a little bit more over the past year on Substack, knowing about all the cool things that you have done or are continuing to do. You are a dynamic individual from the first year of life to today. The things that you have been through, the decisions you've made, and the experience that you've had to find ways not only to make the world a better place, but transcend it to other people. I'm stoked to talk to you today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with this book. Very
Sure.
passionate about jiu-jitsu, as you know.
Sure.
How did this book come to be?
Well, Rickson and I had talked about it a long time. You know, we're good friends, and we've known each other a long time. We've been through a lot together. You know, we kind of met at a critical point in both of our lives. He was just about to go to Japan for the first time. I was just about to go to Cambodia for the first time and work as a war crimes investigator. And so we were both kind of on the cusp of these big moments in our lives, and we both did it, and both of those events changed both of our lives, and we stayed close throughout all the years, you know, and we're more, you know, friends, you know. I wasn't ever really a jiu-jitsu sycophant. I came from like a more of a kickboxing, Jeet Kune Do type background. I got into jiu-jitsu because it scared me, because it was, you know, wrestlers kind of scared me. And so I was always kind of like the doubting Thomas of jiu-jitsu. I hated gis. I hated sport jiu-jitsu. There was no sport jiu-jitsu back then. There was fighting. And so, and he understood that I was going to dangerous places and stuff and doing dangerous stuff. So he saw that I was kind of a different type of student. And most of the time we really didn't talk about jiu-jitsu. We talked about history and life. And I taught him things. He taught me things. And it was very reciprocal. I was close to all his kids, and I got to know them all very well and help them in schools and get in and out of trouble and things like that. And so we had wanted to do it for a long time, and then COVID came, so that was the window of opportunity. And we did it, and yeah, it was a labor of love. The second book was much harder because he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease really just after we got started. So it was kind of a book that started out as being like the victory lap of the New York Times bestseller that was like going to be like a lifestyle guide, this and that. And then I went, wow, this is a real book now. And so it took a long time to really wade into the reality of, you're you're facing this thing that ultimately you can't beat, and so that was hard. A lot of long hard phone calls, and just really having to kind of press him to talk frankly about it. And I think in the end we succeeded. It's frankly, I like that book better. It's a smaller book, a simpler book, but that was a much more difficult book to write.
Yeah, it's a wonderful companion to the first book. If even if you don't have interest in jujitsu and the history of MMA and the Gracie family, Hickson is the great when it comes to jujitsu fighting. And it's funny that you feared wrestlers and jujitsus and you found yourself with the greatest of all time and learning from him and probably getting beat up by him quite a few times. And the story.
Yeah, well, he just, he's a very demanding teacher, and he doesn't teach that many people. So if he decides to teach you, then you better listen. And Jose Padilla, the Narcos director, is a good friend of mine and Hickson's, and he once watched Hickson teaching me, and he was like, he's like a really mean Buddha. And because you do it wrong, you get yelled at. I mean, Crone will tell you that you get yelled at, you and I saw him do it to some of the best Mundial world black belt champions would show up in L.A. and I'd come up to his house, and there'd be some superhero of the sport, and Hickson would say, "Oh, Peter, hey, come on here, work with so and so," and he'd ask us both to do something really basic, and then, of course, we'd do something wrong, and the whole class would be based around that one tiny little thing we did wrong. And you'd never do it wrong again for the rest of your life. And so his jujitsu is incredibly simple but perfect. And that's what he kind of passed on to me, sort of what Bruce Lee used to say, simple but not easy. And it's if you don't have the real basics, you're just building on sand. And so it was just very simple fundamentals over and over and over, and a lot of fighting, and a lot of like really starting on your feet, defending a big hook, defending a kick, clinch, takedown, how to take somebody down so you don't knock yourself out or hurt yourself, and the real things you have to know how to do. And that's really what I teach now. I mean, I teach make my students do a lot of stand up and just get used to being in the pocket, having people try to hit you, because that's the most dangerous zone, and that's the most neglected zone today. Where in the old days he'd put boxing gloves on a guy like Paul Vunak and line us up and say, "Okay, take him down," and Paul Vunak could punch people in the face. And if you were lazy on the ground and you weren't defending your head, he'd slap you. And Chris Howder will tell you stories about this. And Chris is one of my favorite teachers in the world. And I don't think people realize not how good he is and how good a teacher he is, because he comes from a brawling, we're like born one day apart. So we're like, inbred twins. And he's like from two towns over in Southern California from me. He was a, brawler and a punk rock guy, and kind of had a misspent youth like me. So we really, it's funny. And, he's an incredible teacher. Chris Burns is very good, but Chris Burns is a kid, Howder's been around a long time.
So many, and you mentioned he doesn't train many people, but the black belts that he has and the people that he does train, you mentioned your son is a Hickson Gracie purple belt, and you want to scale that where jiu-jitsu is, of course, grown immensely popular these days because of the Gracie family bringing it to the United States and its evolution through people like you and others. And you mentioned sport jiu-jitsu. So it's become a sport with
Yeah.
specific rule sets and the gi or even no gi and all of these other constraints that we add in for competition and people to watch. But it's practicality at its foundation is what it was made for. And I'm not surprised to hear that is how you still teach it in your gym and how it was trained. Because yeah, we can
Well,
play sport jiu-jitsu, but if we're not slapping each other, we're not seeing the risk. Well, how does
and
that
those
trans?
guys are look, I don't knock the sport jiu-jitsu guys. They're great athletes. They're just, you know, they're fishing with spinners and I'm fishing with flies. It's not it's just apples and oranges. Um, and I also got to train with Gene LaBelle. And I don't think Gene LaBelle gets the credit that he deserves. I don't think American, especially the catch as catch can freestyle wrestlers, get the respect they deserve because they were as much the first MMA fighters of anyone in the world, like Farmer Burns and these guys who would go to these fairs and have to fight loggers and farmers and commercial fishermen and, you know, professional dangerous guys. Like the guys, I have two students that are farmers. They have strength you can't build in a gym. I had a clamor as a student. He had grip strength that was like nothing I'd ever seen. A tree trimmer who does one hand chainsaws all day. Like that's a different kind of strength. And and so, you know, you really see what's out in the, you know, what's out in the world. Or the Thais I used to train with that are like human beef jerky, you know, that can take, you know, that can just take punishment like no fighters I've ever seen. They'll never tap. And, you know, you have to be careful not to hurt them because, you know, especially like I trained some of the Cambodian military guys and they were incredibly tough. And so there's all different levels of dangerous out there in the world. And Gene LaBelle was among the most dangerous. He was a really scary guy. And he luckily liked me because I was good. I wasn't great. I wasn't a pro fighter or anything, but I was a surfer. And he was really afraid of surfing in the ocean because he had gotten his teeth knocked out. I think he got his two front teeth knocked out and at Makaha in Hawaii with surfing with Lord Jim Tallyho Blears. And so for whatever and Gene's dad actually I think broke his neck body surfing and died in front of him when he was a little boy. So he had this, you know, this thing with the ocean. And yeah, but he was a genius. I mean, Gene LaBelle was a physical genius. And he was a great boxer because his mom managed the Olympic Auditorium. So he learned boxing from Sugar Ray Robinson and people like that. And then he learned, you know, I think his first wrestling teacher was one of the early great catch as catch can guys from the LA Athletic Club. So he was really touched, you know, in the way that martial arts, you know, the fact like Gene LaBelle put his hands on me and yeah, Ed Strangler Lewis, that was his teacher. And so like you have this lineage, like Strangler Lewis puts his hand on Gene puts his hand on you. And so it's almost like, you know, the old phrase laying of hands, you know, and it gets passed on, you know, and Gene's whole thing was about pain and it was about pressure and Hickson's whole thing was about pressure. And it was never, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to do this. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make this person so uncomfortable that he's going to give me something. And when he gives me something, I'll take that something he gives me, which is the way that we approached it, you know, and like I train a handful of MMA fighters if they're not dumb, right? Like I've had some that are just dumb and uncoachable and they go to too many people. They train with too many. They go to this guy, that guy, the other thing. And they just, you know, and I look at their body, I look at their personality and I see, well, that's great. You trained with that guy, but you're not him. You'll never be him. You don't have the physique. Your mindset's different. You have to take what you've got. And like, you know, that's the army you got to fight with. And so, I have one guy who's a good kickboxer and I switched him to, I fight lefty and I'm right-handed and which is very effective against grapplers because you got your strong straight jab forward and you can stand in the middle of the mats or the middle of the ring, and you each have one bullet. And you can wait, and they have to pull the trigger. They have to make that move. And if you're calm and you have strategic patience, then yeah, I'll stand there all day because I know the onus is on you. It's not on me. And then you got to get through that right hand. And even if they get your waist, if they don't have you in like that, you can frame off their face and start throwing uppercuts. And so that's a lot of stuff we used to do. And like my first black belt came from John Peretti, who was an incredible fighter. And he had been a pro kickboxer. Then he was a Gene LaBelle black belt. And he, was a physical genius like Gene. And so he trained me in Wing Chun. He trained me in kickboxing. He trained me in judo, knife fighting. And he would get the best guys that he could find. This is in New York City when I was in graduate school, when there's no jujitsu in New York, none. Henzo's years away. Craig Kukuk's in New Jersey, and he finds a black belt who works at the Brazilian embassy. And he's just this big, fat, out of shape Brazilian dude. And he just come and put us in stuff and like hold us there for days. And then, knife fighting. He had fought a lot. He had fought on Indian reservations. He fought a lot of street fights. And so he was very doubtful of the kind of circular Filipino knife fighting styles. So he brought in one of the best Russian fencers. This is the fastest human I've ever seen, but he could only go in a straight line and he couldn't move laterally. So we would fight with rubber knives and fencing masks and kickbox. And same with pistols. Like he found the best pistol guys, and whatever it was, he really he had a real intellectual hunger. He wasn't threatened by, oh, this thing's better. Oh, I'm in this cult and that cult. And as you know, with martial arts, it gets very culty. And then when the Gracies came, I was just lucky. I met Hickson, great guy. He surfed. We were friendly. We thought they were the Garcia brothers. Oh, they're these Mexicans called the Garcia brothers. Yeah, they're really good. One just opened a school on Pico. So that's how I went there. My friend was a guy named Todd Irvin, was one of the biggest male models of the 80s, and he had wrestled at Duke. And he was a big, strong guy, 6'3", 200 pounds. And so when he said, hey, this guy I have no words for it. I went, okay, I better go and check this thing out. And so that's how I first met Hickson. And it was very organic, and he was nice, and the Brazilians all surfed, and it was kind of a pretty easy culture. And then over time, it just got, once, Hoist wins the UFC, and then the whole thing just explodes, and then Henzo came to New York, and I was teaching at Columbia at that time when Danaher was a graduate student. And so Danaher, I remember the first night I saw him there as a white belt. And then that was it. He never left. And so he applied his big brain to jujitsu and grappling and started to pull the thing apart. But, all the leg stuff that's so popular now, Gene LaBelle showed me all that years and years before any of that. And I did some of it, but when you're fighting kickboxers and they can kick you in the face when you're trying to grab their ankle with both hands, it's not so fun. It's not so appealing, right? You're going to get, and Peretti was a world champion kickboxer. So if you touched his foot, you got kicked in the face. And, so that's the reality of that game, so that starts to break down under that kind of stress. You're like, whoa, I can do it, but I want to go face down if I'm going to try to do it, because I don't want to be sitting up and getting kicked in the face. So, there's a lot of evolutions, and, and then the Southeast Asian kickboxers in Cambodia and Thailand, like they're in their own league. I mean, their ability, and willingness to absorb punishment. Like it's almost part of their sport. And this, again, you guys all love stoicism. I mean, those are the most stoic fighters I've ever seen. Um, yeah, so it's been an interesting ride.
I've learned a lot from you and through your writing, and the history and lineage of mixed martial arts in this country, particularly predating the UFC. It's fascinating. And you talk about these figures like Gene LeBell, which I knew that name, but in our conversations and some of the things that you've produced, you see these figures. And sure, they have this one craft that they're good at, but the interest that people have to bring in other martial arts, other experts like Gene LeBell and all these other people that you just talked about, that's where you see this growth happen, that convergence of different domains to truly mix in martial arts around martial arts. But for you in your life, mixing all the different life domains that you've experienced intentionally and unintentionally, that's led to all the amazing books that you've written and the things you do now, like that idea of convergence and being open to cross training, if you will. Not so much to where you don't have an identity like some of the fighters that you talked about, like you don't know who you are, you're just emulating everybody else. But how can you, like what Bruce Lee says, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and make what is uniquely your own. And mixing those arts, it's so cool to hear about that evolution to where we are today. Because the sport jiu-jitsu athletes, like you talked about, a lot of them do cross-train. So of course they specialize in gi, no gi, or whatever the rule set might be. But a lot of them might do MMA or they might do other things to make themselves better. So definitely no knock to them. Because of course Hickson, he competed in particular rule sets. But Valley Tudo, which was as pure as fighting can get, that's where he really shined and really where he demonstrated the power of jiu-jitsu, even in comparison to UFC, where we see a little bit more rule sets comparatively. The early days, maybe not so much, but it grew pretty quickly into being more marketable for mass markets.
Yeah, which I find problematic. I don't care about the audience at all. Like I
Sure.
don't care. Like once you're pandering to the audience, you know, you might as well just have guys in chariots with lions and swords and things like that. I mean, we're that close, and I'm not interested in like, bread and circuses. And so um I would really like to see the top wrestler against the top kickboxer against and just see. And once the time limits changed and once, and then you got the explosiveness of performance enhancing drugs and things like that, which were rampant. And I don't really know that much about it now, but in the early days, it was unbelievable. And your friend would go from 143, and I would fight at 149 or 8 or something, and they would suddenly be like 165 and they'd be a monster. But then a year later, they'd detach a bicep, they'd snap an Achilles. So it was like they put a 454 in a Volkswagen and didn't change the transmission. So I saw a lot of people get good, go pro, do all these things, but then just suffer horrible injuries and never do it again. I mean, I'm 61 and I'm still training 2 or 3 days a week. Presently, I have a broken big toe. It's not much fun, but one of my larger blue belts, I had him in side control, and he just did a big Olaf like, "Rah!" And it's this toe's broken a few times, and that's the price of admission. I mean, that's just getting old, and I can't train with my son anymore. He's way too scary, and he's too strong, too flexible, too fast. And he just, he trains in a shark tank. He trains with the former, I think, Bellator runner-up John Salter, who was a really good wrestler, great guy, runs an incredible academy, Salty Dog Jiu-Jitsu, here in Wilmington. Really leads from the front, which is important in a martial arts school. You have to have a leader. If you don't, it gets factional. It can get really ugly. And I don't like the Lost Boys clubs, looking for daddies and all the weird stuff you get. Jiu-jitsu gets weird and culty. And so, Salter's out there walking his talk every day and with a lot of injuries, with, a lifetime of wrestling injuries. Cause he was, I think he was an NCAA champ, maybe Division 2 or 3, but he's a serious guy. but a very humble guy, like I said, who just, walks his talk.
And when it comes to jujitsu, I mean, for me, the idea is how do you get better? It's like everything else aside, how am I getting better? Of course, on the mats and how can I relate it to life? And that orientation that I see from coaches, and you talk about Hickson, like if he sees failures or mistakes, let's hone in on that. And he has his own coaching method, which is hilarious, and I love to hear it. But let's address those because that will become part of your foundation. And like you said, if you're building on sand, you're going to be screwed down the line eventually anyway. So let's address all of the foundational invisible jujitsu, as he talks about, those primary components of what your game is, and address that because all the fancy stuff doesn't matter if you have shit foundation.
Yeah.
I love hearing those coaches that address that. I'm curious from Hickson and learning from him. You already mentioned your various martial arts and striking background that you have, and you teach practical jujitsu, how it could relate to self-defense, whatever it may be. Of course, rule sets for your mixed martial artists and others. But what other types of philosophies have you gotten from Hickson or your own life experiences to bring to you as a professor in your gym?
Um, just like for example, if I get a new student, I say, okay, go, pretty much put me in anything you want. Put me in, and then I'll like I've never been big. I'm pretty athletic. I've all played sports my whole life. But I have strategic patience, right? So you can't make me uncomfortable. After Hickson, after Jean-Jacques Machado, and some of the people I've trained with, there's not much you can do to me. And then kickboxing and boxing are much worse. Like those are incredibly unpleasant. And half the time you're out on your feet. And that's like if you can't fight when you're out on your feet, you're not going to be able to really box or kickbox. And that's probably not a good thing for your brain, but it is what it is. Um, so I'll have them put me in something and then I'll move around a little bit and I'm just sending out feelers and I'm just kind of seeing, okay, so they're a little light here. Oh, they're a little too heavily weighted here. And then I'll just kind of get them to overcommit to something and then take the thing I want or whatever. But yeah, it's a kind of acceptance. It's not like this, I'm going to force my will. If I was 250 pounds, I could probably do that. It'd probably be like that. I see a lot of big guys. I think, uh, generally speaking, smaller guys are technically better because they have to be. Big guys can rely on the things they were given: strength, weight, and when I get a student, I kind of look at them. I look at their personality. Like I have one guy now, guy who broke my toe. He's a dean at the University of North Carolina. And but he had done judo and he had boxed a little. And he's maybe 5'7", 200 and change, right? And he's got a fine container of wine and cheese and everything in front of him. And I was like, okay, what's this guy's gift? And I was like, oh, Keskatami. And so like I got this guy like Keskatami side control, Keskatami going between those things. And man, he has the most brutal Keskatami because that's a horrible position that is, I think, underappreciated by a lot of jujitsu people. And so I've turned him into this crushing machine because that's his skill set. He can use his weight. He doesn't need cardio. And and his cardio is, not the best. And so and he's still able to train every week, and so I get a lot. Like I have another guy, he's a stunt coordinator. He can't afford to get hurt. Like people come to train with me not to get hurt because there's, and then if I have students that are really have that, I send them to Salters. If I have them a little level down below that, I send them to another school. If they're a dick, I tell my son to come home from college for the weekend and tell him I'll buy him all the meat he can eat. And then that's funny. I mean,
Funny
because
now.
he's, yeah, he's not, I think why he's so good is that he has no ego about jiu-jitsu. He's done it his whole life. He's grown up around the best guys in the sport, not really knowing who they were, because he met Hickson when he was probably 3, and John Jock and Howder and all those guys. And he never really trained more than 2 days a week his whole life. But he's now 20 and he's trained for probably 18 years. And so the depth of his game, of like the maturity of his game, is pretty astounding. And when he was 18, he went to Japan by himself, stayed in the Kodokan dorms, trained at the Kodokan, then got to train with some of the Japanese university judo teams, then went to train with one of Hickson's best black, really good Taka Watanabe in Tokyo. So he's just picked up he's trained with Howder a lot. He's trained with Chris Burns. So he just has a depth and a kind of calmness to his game that you're not gonna, I can't make him squeak. I can pull every dirty trick I have, and I have a lot of dirty tricks, a lot of dirty, nasty, not IBJJF approved stuff that LaBelle taught us, really.
Yes.
And it works, and in real fighting, that's real fighting. Like, it's people are going to do nasty things. I mean, I had people try to kill me in Cambodia. And so, and nobody that's real. That's not what I call ritual violence. Oh, what are you looking at? That's ritual violence. This is people who lived through genocide in a society where when I first went there, the average income was less than $300 a year. So you're talking about a whole society of people with PTSD, and that had that had killed to the point where it was absolutely nothing to them. And so they would catch a motorcycle thief. The police would let the crowd gather and then allow people to take turns beating him to death. And, oh, wait, you got a turn. Yeah, no, it's his turn. And they take a concrete block and throw it on him. And that's a whole different world, and that's a place you don't. And I would say to Ixon, look, if I go on the ground, I'm dead. Like, there's no going on the ground and choking them or doing an armbar. No, this is you're going to get surrounded. And, because we're even guys like us who aren't big, we're big over there, right? That's the only real advantage. But, if you get in a situation where you're losing, you will find yourself surrounded and all the rats will come out to eat you. And so it's a explosive violence and running. And so I always ran. I always made sure I could run a mile. It's not very fast. It's kind of embarrassing, but it's 7 or 8 minutes in clothes with boots. And, and I had to do it a few times, not a full mile, but you got to run, it was like, you're like OJ. I date myself, but remember the old Hertz ads with the OJ and yeah, I had a couple of those where you're running through markets and stuff like that. And that's the reality. And it happens. All of a sudden somebody's trying to do something to you and there's no prelude. There's no foreplay. It's on. And it's not like I'm right-handed, I'm left-handed, I'm going to do that. No, you're just all of a sudden it's on and you're, kind of in a kill or be killed situation. And there's no way to really prepare for that. And then you really do get a better sense of who you are. And from those situations, you get a lot of confidence. And so it got harder and harder to take this MMA stuff seriously because it just got silly, it got too much like WWF. In the beginning, it was very respectful. Pretty much everybody, even if they fought each other, they'd see each other a week later in a gym. So you kind of had to be respectful. I mean, I got to train with guys like Igor Zinoviev, who beat Mario Sperry in an early fight, because Peretti was the promoter for Extreme Fighting, which was around the same vintage as the early UFC. So anyone who wanted to fight in extreme fighting had to come in and fight with all of us. So, like John Lewis was one of Peretti's discoveries. Really, I met John at Hickson's. I said, "Hey, this guy's really athletic. You should take a look at him." And then John wound up, having a career in MMA. And the Igor Zinoviev, and then just a bunch of oddballs would show up. Like a British bare knuckle boxing guy, Wing Chun superheroes, Taekwondo superheroes, a sumo wrestler, and you just got this really wide range of fighting styles that you got to kind of try out, and really skilled guys with really shitty martial arts styles that were way better athletes than you, train much harder, but they just, I mean, I don't want to name any of them. It's mean because these guys poured their heart and soul into these things. But you just go, oh, is he really going to do that? And he turn his back to you to do some big thing, and you tackle him and choke him. And that was that. And it's like Howder said, like, we had M16s, they had muskets. And it really was like that for a long time. I mean, I got to know so many people and become good friends with people because I was a good teacher and I never humiliated them. And I knew how dangerous they were. And I thought a lot of them, world-class kickboxers in Southeast Asia, and I thought a lot of them even willing to get on a mat, because they didn't need to get on the mat. They were as good as they could be in their thing, but they were curious. And one of the most remarkable guys that I trained was a guy named Sylvain Vogel, who is one of the best linguists in the world. But he also spent, most of the 80s in Afghanistan during the Russian war, and, was with the Pashto and spoke Pashto, and an incredibly dangerous guy. And he became my best student. And so then I trained a bunch of his French associates in Southeast Asia and some of the heavy Cambodian guys. And it was really fun. You do get to meet some remarkable people through jujitsu you know, if you're gracious on some level, and I didn't feel I'm not stupid. I know these are like professional dangerous guys, and I can beat them at this game of wrestling on a soft mat. Okay, but woohoo. But I'd go into the jungle with them, and I would do whatever they told me to do. Because I knew if I didn't, uh, there were people that did go into the jungle with those guys and didn't come back. And so, yeah, and they were pretty unsentimental about it. Like, you kept up, you did what you were told, you kept your mouth shut, and you'd be okay. But you didn't ask questions or offer suggestions or anything else. And because we would go from the Cambodian border across into Vietnam, into the Montagnard Hill Tribe camps. They were our best allies in the Vietnam War. There was one faction of them that fought the Vietnamese until 1992. They never surrendered. They were still attacking the Vietnamese when my friend Nate Thayer found them and pretty much orchestrated their secret evacuation to North Carolina, because they said, "Oh, you're the American. Oh, you brought the weapons you promised us in 1975? Yeah, we've been waiting. We're down to 2,300 rounds, and we got one grenade launcher with one round, and they're still fighting the Vietnamese." And and listening to Voice of America radio, and incredible people. I mean, some of the most ferocious warriors ever on the planet. And the Green Berets said that, like, these guys were like having hunting dogs with you. They would observe things, minutes before we did, and that they knew how many of their lives had been saved by them. So when they found out that these guys never surrendered, they said there was an incredible kind of underground railroad of human rights workers, journalists, spies, State Department people that all put their political differences aside to help these people get sanctuary in the United States. And their visas, everything was fast tracked. And they would have to go from the border of Cambodia and Vietnam to the capital, Phnom Penh. And if the Cambodian police caught them, they would sell them to the Vietnamese. So it was very high stakes. And yeah, so now North Carolina is the largest Southeast Asian hill tribe population outside of Southeast Asia as a result of really Nate Thayer in the beginning starting that Underground Railroad. And so, yeah, Nate was a remarkable guy. He was the only one of us who got to interview Pol Pot. Got blown up by an anti-tank mine, almost got killed. Had malaria more times than you could imagine, and died very young, and died of self-inflicted abuse, really, in the end, drinking and drugs and stuff like that. So there are things you see that you can't unsee, and I think that's something some people don't really realize, and that there is a price of admission to all of this, and so um, it's not for everybody. I mean, I have a lot of dead friends, a lot of people. Some took their own lives, some did the slow suicide of drugs and alcohol. But it it definitely it's you see it with the soldiers who come back from the war on terror and what they face. I counsel and advise soldiers, veterans, um, through my foundation, and it's yeah, it's difficult. It's hard, especially now I have draft age kids, and so it strikes home even harder.
I first want to say the first part of your answer where you talk about your philosophy of coaching, that's just beautiful. I mean, of course, we can teach concepts, but you're looking at people from their personality, their attributes, and what's truly going to make them better. So it's not a one size fits all approach. I appreciate that so much. But as you pivoted into what I equally, if not more so appreciate, looking at things like jujitsu or mixed martial arts are these different things that we have in our industrialized nations and of course across the world as people use for community growth and getting together. But how serious we look at certain things, like you said, you can recognize that people will grapple with you on soft mats and you can be pretty good because of your time in that domain. But that is not the most important thing in life. And you have lived, as I mentioned in the beginning, and you've talked about now when it came to Cambodia, Thailand, and all the places that you've been to write some of your books and live your life. There is much more to life and much more serious things that are happening out there that have much higher repercussions than losing a jiu-jitsu match or even getting knocked unconscious
Yeah,
in a fight. And that practicality of jiu-jitsu and how it can fall apart really quickly, where your mile time is much more important than how good your rear naked is on the ground.
yeah.
And it's probably a good time to pivot towards some of your life experiences, as you mentioned in Cambodia. If I go back to the beginning, even, I'm sorry, you're about to say something.
Oh, just the one thing I would say that probably saved my life more times than anything else, and it was I had a right-hand man in Cambodia named Sok Sin, and he had survived the Khmer Rouge, and I was like, how'd you do it? And he said, "Oh, I worked harder than any man, and I sang revolutionary songs louder than any man." And he basically acted like he was kind of a moron for 4 years. And then he got out and he was the ultimate hustler. And you could pull up and there'd be an army checkpoint, drunken soldiers, your worst nightmare. Get out of the car, give him smokes, chat him up. We're on our way, no drama. Next car of Whitey's behind it, they get shaken down and, bad things happen. I mean, I had three people I didn't really know well, but the first trip I went there, they got kidnapped by the Khmer Rouge at a checkpoint, taken in the forest, killed, and they ransomed the families for I think over a month, and the guys were dead, and it was mainly because checkpoint didn't handle it really one of them stopped to take a picture. That was it. Up, out. And but Saksin always used to say, no, weapon of the mouth.
Mm,
The weapon of the mouth. So the
mm.
weapon of the mouth is what saved me more times than anything.
Yeah, we tend to
Yeah.
think those hard skills, like our proficiency in our offense, whether that's with firearms or, of course, fighting skills, or our ability to flee if we need to, and how fast we are. Like, of course, hard skills are important, but if you don't have soft skills in these dynamic situations where you talk to others and interact, that the weapon of the mouth, where you
Well,
can
and
interact with
the
others.
thing too is like you can like, especially with really aggressive people that are looking for they got something, that they're really easy to diffuse and confuse. And so what I would always do is be like, what, like I couldn't hear them, or like I what, and I could close the distance that way
Yeah.
and have them in a clinch before they even knew. And then they're kind of like, oh, I got tricked, so then they're kind of humiliated. Then the whole thing just kind of goes down. And so like there oftentimes there's no need to escalate. Like, and if you're calm, that's more unnerving than anything to people, because it's like I'm getting hit every week. So, oh boy, some civilian guy is mad that I took his parking spot or some shit like that. Like I had some guy get all stupid with me once surfing when I was with my kids, and I made him cry, and I didn't put a hand on him, but I'm a good actor. I acted like Charles Manson, and 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 he just really, and he was a soft upper class guy, and and I wasn't wearing a leash on my surfboard, which is the law. And I said, oh, and my friend's head of ocean rescue, he runs the jujitsu school where we all train together. The cops train there. It's my hometown.
Right.
And I'm not gonna boo. I live here, boo. Like I'm not 13 anymore. I grew out of that. So I say, okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I need to I get my leash on next time, no problem. But because I'm so passive, he gets all, bonered up and like, and I'm like, okay, okay. And then he says, and if my kids were out here and that board hit him, I'd kill you. And I was like, that's the bridge too far. And so then I just paddled next to him, started and I said, you threaten me. I feel threatened. And I just kept repeating that like a mantra. And he got so freaked out, and he's trying to paddle away from me. And I'm a really fast paddler. And there's no paddling away from me. And I wouldn't let him get out of the water. And I just kept saying, you threaten me. I feel threatened. And that's pure Jean LaBelle. And like pure Jean LaBelle. And then finally he just went like, all I want to do is go in. And then, and my kids are with me. So, and I'm wearing Speedos and sunglasses. So I actually do look pretty crazy. So, so I tell my kids, I go, like, go to the truck. Like, I don't know where this is going to go. So then I go, my kids go to the truck, and I see like 3 heads pop up above the sand dune. And the guy, pointing at me. He's got his 2 tough friends with him, but they're all like golfer soft guys, and I'm like, and I kind of said, you know what? I actually, now I'm mad. Now it's like, I'm going to fight all 3 of them, and that's okay. Like, I, it's not a big deal. Like, and I'd probably just slap them. I wouldn't hurt them really. I mean, maybe one of them a boxer and I'd get beat up a little or whatever, big deal. And so I just go, okay, like gotta get a lot of oxygen. So I just get the good Hickson breathing going, and I just slowly start jogging towards them in my Speedos. Then and I don't even get 50 yards away, and they bail. And then I go to the car, I put my shit in the car, and then I as we're driving away, they're in the parking lot writing my license plate number down, and I never saw them again. But most of the time I'll just say, oh geez, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to do that. And that's the end of it. There's no need to get in that big ego battle and get in trouble and hurt somebody, or it's just a waste of everybody's time and energy, you know, and everybody here is packing. So, you know, including me, because everybody else is. So, and I'm good with pistols, but I don't want to do any of that kind of nonsense. But a scared person will.
Right.
A coward or a scared person who can't handle real physical conflict will go to weapons very quickly. And once a weapon's out, in my world, you know, it has to be used. And I'm not going to take a weapon out, but if you're going to point a gun at me or something like that, then this thing's escalated into such a high, stupid place for no real reason other than ego, you know, and there's a lot of people with ego problems, you know, that have big muscles and do these things to cover it up and get the tattoos and get the thing and the roids and, you know, but it's armor, you know, it's like it's psychological armor. And, you know, it is what it is. The world's a strange place, but I like people, you know, I like people. So I get along really with most people because I find people interesting. And I love teaching. Teaching was really fun at the university because you come in contact with people from all walks of life, from all stations, people you'd never meet, people that you might have a prejudice against that type or thing or whatever, and there they are, and you actually are like, wow, this person's smart, this person's nice, this person. And then I was really good at advising them because most the academic thing is a scam now, and it's to sell them another degree, da 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 da. And I'd say, what are you going to do when you get out? Oh, I'm going to go to law school. Oh, really? You're going to go to law school? Where are you going to go? Oh, I'm going to go to Yale or Michigan. And I was like, well, that's interesting because you might get a B from me if you're lucky. So you're either the best standardized test taker in the world or somebody's really, you know, filling your sales with bullshit. I said, maybe if you follow my directions, I can get you into George Washington or American University or ECU or, you know, but you're a B grade law school guy. That's no shame in that. And here's the plan. You get out, you go in the public defender's office, you go in the DA's office, and you will try more cases in a year than they do in their career. Then you go to the big firm and you make the money and do the thing. And the guy I put on that path was Ethan Milius, John Milius's son, and he's brilliant, and he had a daughter with one of the Gracie Horion's daughter, and so you know at like 19. And he wanted to get a PhD in literature. He's a brilliant literature student at UCLA. And I said, dude, you gave that up. Like, just the way it is now. I said, you know, you don't get to go get a worthless PhD. You know, you go to law school and you're not going to go to a good law school because you got a kid. So, but when you're done, you go into either public defender or DA's office. And now he's, I think, the top DA in LA County. And yeah, so again, you know, it's just helping people find a, a path. And there isn't one path. There isn't like, oh, this is, and I tell like I had a student this weekend. I said, look, there's no, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm still like, I don't know what I'm doing when I'm grow up. I'm not grown up. I'm still, you know, I manage construction in order to have a regular paycheck, in order to have intellectual freedom, in order to run my foundation, in order to help people. I teach martial arts. I edit books. I I do a million things. I do private eye stuff sometimes. Um, you know, I do most of that for free because I don't like deadbeat ex-husbands and bullies and scumbags. So any chance I can get to make their life hard, I will. And that's joyous. I mean, that's fucking Nietzsche's gay science. So yeah. I mean somebody's got to do it, you know?
And
And we're in a time of fucking cowards. And I mean I really believe that I think it's shifting. I sense a shift because all of us taxpayer normal Joes trying to be good parents and citizens, we're getting screwed. And it's not about a party or this, and I believe in that, and I hate that party and these ones and the. No, it's just, we've become a very corrupt, decadent society ruled by a very powerful elite that I was once a part of. I mean, I grew up incredibly privileged in Southern California. And so I know that world very well. And I I could have chose to join it and led a very different life. And I very consciously chose not to. So
And the choices that you made throughout your life are just fascinating because I mean, starting when you were 1 year old, you almost drowned, and your
yeah,
mom, unable to swim, your mom gets in the pool. I believe you were face down in the deep end, and
yeah,
so she had to get on the brink of the deep end just to get your body face down, which is just a wild scene to consider. Gets
yeah,
you back soon enough, of course, saves you, and I believe in less than a year, because if I recall, you were 2 years old riding off the diving
yeah,
board, tricycle in the deep end. So she gets you into the swim lessons, which was one of those teachers where I think of like throwing the baby in the pool and then they naturally look up, but getting you comfortable being uncomfortable, like we talk about a lot in
yeah,
jujitsu, teaching you the lesson through adversity. So, like you say, your private eye stuff. But I agree. There's a lot of scumbags out there because they don't know anything better than to be a scumbag because you can get away with it so easy now. So when
yeah.
we have this nihilism and lack of meaning in lives, where we see the benefit of being a good person and contributing to your community and service and things like this that you've done your whole life in different domains as you've aged, adversity can be a great teacher. And if you're not seeking it intentionally, the world is going to give it to you in a variety of ways, which you and
That's
Hickson write
exactly
on
right.
beautifully in his books, whether it's the loss of Hickson's son, which he dives into quite a bit in both books, and then of course his Parkinson's disease and all the sharing that happens there and translating those lessons. But the gift of adversity, sometimes you need to have it be given to you from others. And I love your story about those guys at the beach. So there's always benefit, first and foremost, in being comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's going to be very hard to make a man like you uncomfortable. So you're not going to escalate unless you're protecting your others' lives and using firearms there. So you're going to maintain calm unless you want to use that tool that you have, thanks to Gene LaBelle and others, of getting a little crazy. And it's okay to use a little ounce of crazy from time to time. But
Oh
how
no,
we interact with
crazy's
others.
great.
Yeah,
Crazy's scary. Crazy scares
absolutely.
me. You know what I mean? Like some crazy the fentanyl tweaker type that's probably got some scary blood-borne diseases, because like that's what I dealt with in Cambodia. I mean, you had the highest AIDS rates in the world, so you don't want to be trading DNA. Like, so you have all this whole nother layers upon layers of things, um to where, yeah, it's yeah, the real world is a different place, and I had a lot of, dojo superheroes. I said, hey, you want to go to Cambodia with me? I'll get you paid, you can teach, got great students, get to shoot the guns, get to do all the macho stuff that you say you like to do. Not many takers. Not many takers. And the one guy who did go with me a couple times, the first day he got out of the car and just took one look at Phnom Penh, I was like, dude, your eyes are spinning in your head like pinwheels. Like, you better get it together because, you're supposed to be watching my back, and you look like you're about to faint. And so he got it together. But it was a wake-up call. And he was a great fighter in the world of fighting, but suddenly he's in the deep end.
That's a
So,
different domain, in the deep
yeah.
end, like you said, and you ride on water so well. Of course, you ride on jujitsu in many aspects, but it's very interesting thinking about your parents and having that near-death experience at such a young age. I would think most people wouldn't throw them back into the deep end, but that actually is the best choice. So you can naturally and formally develop those skills, and then coincidentally, or maybe not at all, you became a lover of the ocean. You became a
Oh,
surfer,
yeah,
and
my
your
whole
life
life
circled.
is the ocean.
Absolutely.
I was in the ocean yesterday. I'm in the ocean almost every day. My parents were gnarly, though. I mean, my parents were gnarly, and, my mom is one of the best writing teachers in the world, but she was in, her first big MGM movie when she was like 10 years old. So she was like a Shirley Temple. And then she was on Broadway in the original Mary Martin's Peter Pan when she was 18. And then she became one of the real pioneer screenwriters, women screenwriters in Hollywood. And so, you know, she says, so I can't be called sexist. She says, like, what's wrong? I was talking to her this weekend, and she's going to be 90 in a week or two. And she was like, if another person calls me up and says they're scared, she goes, I can't take these people. Why doesn't anyone have any balls anymore? And like, she used balls, you know, not as a gender term. Like, it's just, you know, guts, you know, like, yeah, we all get scared, but we got to jump over the ledge. Like, you know, and I mean, it's the stuff I used to do, I look back at it, I'm like, whoa, ugh. You know, it scares me to think about. But when I was working in Cambodia, you know, I would go on these long fucking scary trips, come back, and I lived on the North Shore of Oahu, which has some of the best big waves in the world. Lived right on the water. And I would get up at 3 in the morning and I would, you know, you listen to the weather buoys. So they'll tell you, oh, you know, 15 feet at 15 seconds or whatever. So you knew, oh, it's going to be big today. And, and it was a deep, deep channel, and the waves were maybe a half a mile out in the ocean. So I would go out the deep channel, and all the sea turtles would be nested up, like hiding from the tiger sharks. And I would go a half mile out in pitch black, and I would just kind of like just wait for the first little bit of light, and then I would surf by myself in gigantic surf, and that became normal, right? And it was always a little scary, but not terrifying. I mean, you know, and then I had kids, and I had kids. I got hit in the temple with a surfboard. I didn't get knocked out or anything that bad, but I did get a hole in the side of my head and bled pretty good. And then I said, okay, you know, I got one kid, I got a second kid on the way, and I can't. It's too selfish. I can't do it. And that's when I moved. I was like, I'm out of here. I had a great run on and off, you know, for about a decade, riding big surf, and then I moved here. But this is an interesting encounter I had there. I lived at the end of the Farrington Highway, where all the rain and all this stuff's going on right now, and it was no man's land. It was where the Hawaiian mafia would bury the bodies, and so there was no cops within 40 minutes, and it was kind of scary. I mean, it was kind of scary because Kauai is an island. It's You can't run and hide there, you know, like the cops' cousins, you know, the gangsters' cousins are the cops. That like it's a very small place. So I lived on this kind of compound. This older guy had it, and I had my house at the end. He had a big house in one end, and it was maybe 5 acres or something. And you know, it's like 3 in the morning. I have a I have a pregnant wife, and I have like a 1-year-old in the crib. And all of a sudden, I hear they had like 4 dogs. The dogs are going crazy, but not like the barking at the cat crazy, like something bad's happening. And I hear this like, hello, no, hello. And it's getting louder and louder. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. And so I go out the back door, I put on black and take my shoes off. I'm not a military guy, right? I'm not a dumb storm the door guy. Like that's not my party. I'm a sneaky guy. And so I look, and there's this naked, giant naked guy on my lawn, and he's screaming like a total lunatic, and he's totally wet. And I'm like, I can't tell if it's blood because it's dark. So I just sneak up behind him, and I just follow him for a long time. For a long time, I'm just kind of checking him out. Like, what's up with this guy? Like, is he dangerous? I was like, nah, marginally dangerous, but kind of just super high on, you know, back then it was ice, you know, which isn't a good drug. You don't, ice guy's got a little turbocharger. And so but he was big and he had a huge ass, right? And I shot pistols a lot, and I was like, okay, I can shoot him in the ass and not even hit any bone. His ass is so big. And so like that's my fallback plan. And I'm just kind of watching him. And then my landlord's up on this second story balcony, you go, what's going on down there? Blah, 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 blah. So he distracts the guy. And so I have a flashlight and I just flash it on the ground and put it in my pocket and pull the slide back on my Glock. And then my landlord goes, Peter, is that you? And the guy turns around, I let go of the slide, and the guy immediately, hands on his head, goes down on like this guy knows the drill. Like he'd been arrested so many times. And then I just point to the rock wall. I go, sit down. And the only thing I said is we have 5 acres and a backhoe and a lot of lime. And I just, and anytime he tries to move, I just point the gun right between his eyes. And we communicated, right? I didn't want to shoot him, but I wasn't going to let him do anything. I got my wife, my kid, everything. So there was no problem, but I had to hold him there for like 40 minutes. And then the police came, and, like corrupt Hawaiian police. And we had a big like ranch gate, and the guy practically hurdled it to get into the police car naked. And the cops are just like, and they see everything, right? And the guy's like, that guy, he's got a gun. And he said that he's going to, and the cop goes, hey, bro, was not one gun, was one flashlight. You take too many drugs. And then he winks at me, and then they take the guy away. But that could have gone really wrong, right? I could have shot somebody for no reason. He's high. He was just a stupid high guy. And I don't want that on my scorecard. Like, that's not a win. There's nothing brave about that. So that was a big win.
Becoming a parent, and in our case, a father, makes you quite invincible. I've made some crazy decisions in my life. I feel like you have lived 100 people's lives in different ways and on the fringes of life in different domains. But it's interesting to hear you talk about the calculated risks that you took prior to becoming a father, and then, of course, still do after, but maybe just not as extremely as you did before. But your life has been full of risk, and living is inherently risky. And it's
Yeah.
ironic that often those who avoid risk encounter much more risk based on trying to live safely. And the title of your podcast with Jocko, which is fantastic, is Don't Be Careful. Careful kills.
Yeah.
And another thing about modern times is we avoid risk at the cost of our own living to the capacity that we could. And there's so much that we could cover in your story, and that you cover with Jocko, which is why I'm intentionally not leaning into everything that went behind the creation of your phenomenal book, Tie Stick, which I believe is becoming a movie now, correct?
I just finished directing a documentary based on it.
Can't
So
wait to see that.
that's just, Hollywood hell. And yeah, no, it's very sad, both in publishing and in entertainment, that it's become this kind of committee driven thing that like us creative people are like kind of incidental. And I call them the Karens and Kens of Hollywood. And they, and you can't offend this and you can't do that and you can't. And I'm like, you wouldn't like us.
Yeah.
You're not gonna like us. Like, guys, swashbuckling, high risk dudes surfing, and brown girls and all that. No, there's nothing in your world that's good. By your metrics, we're bad. And so breaking laws. And I had one Karen from one of the big studios say, oh, well, then after they smuggled that pot, well, why did they do it again? And I was like, well, once they could pay for her mother's cancer treatment, then everything, and like, that's the story they want you to. Well, of course they did it again. It was too easy. It was too exciting. It was too fun. And, yeah. And is it right? Is it good? Is it bad? That's somebody else's call. Would I have been able to do the things I did having not been in that world? No. That was really good training for going to Southeast Asia, all that. And my grandfather, really the one from Jocko, He's the one who said, "Don't be careful, careful kills," because he was a mercenary pilot. He ran Operation Magic Carpet in Alibaba. He flew Yemenites, concentration camp survivors into Israel. Ben Gurion called him the Irish Moses, and he was a badass. And so he had horrific things happen where he had to land in Egypt with no fuel, and there was like a $5,000 bounty for him in 1949. And they're like, "Ah, Maguire, we got you today." And he said, "Oh, I got cholera on board. I need ambulances. Get them here now." And they're like, "Cholera? What do you need to get out of here?" He's like, "Fuel." And they filled him up and he flew away. Weapon of the mouth. And
Weapon of the mouth.
so, yeah, and he was scary. And, they were all scary. Like, the things that was just a normal weekend growing up was like, "Oh, wow, the waves are breaking across the harbor entrance. Let's take the boat out." And that didn't seem weird. So my parents were, I mean, I was a much stricter parent, and it was a different time. My kids got to do a lot. Um, they got to do a lot of things kids their age didn't get to do. But, at home, it was a pretty tight ship, and we homeschooled them for 6 years, and made sure that they basically had the equivalent of a undergraduate education. And they've both done really well in totally different directions.
Yet
So,
another hat that you've worn, homeschooling your sons, which
yeah,
is so cool. But you think back like Hollywood and I don't know that realm. You, of course, know it very well, but
yeah,
accepting a story that is true rather than changing it to a narrative that they think reads well or is going to be acceptable by all. Like you said, it was different times. And
yeah.
I appreciate how you said whether it was right or wrong, that's for you to decide. And it was just a different time, culturally different. Yes, could you get away with it today? Maybe, maybe not. It's too many things, but telling the truth about what happened and those experiences, like you said, led into eventually your dad puts you in the construction crew job and you're a construction manager today, and that allows you to do all the things that you can do independently. And then those experiences led eventually because of surfing. You go over to Australia, you get your heart broken, which is a hilarious story, by the way, that you talk about in Jocko. You come back, you don't want to go to California, so you get into academia and you start studying history, and you end up becoming a professor of law and war. And that's writing, I believe that was your first book, right? Law
Yeah,
and
yeah,
War.
yeah,
Incredible. And then war crimes investigator, you start traveling the world and not only tie stick, but you have death in Cambodia, which you referred to some of those
yeah,
stories there. But all of these experiences, in many ways, I would imagine, were unplanned. They just led into one another because you were
yeah.
following your heart, your passions, even though you had the choice, which is also such an interesting component of you, of having a privileged life and not having to do much on the West
Most,
Coast.
but most interesting is, my dad was a totally self-made man, and he built much of LA, right? Downtown, Playa Vista, all that. Um, but he, grew up in Israel, France, as the son of this pilot. So he had a very unstable upbringing, and he appeared to be this kind of rich wasp dude, but he really wasn't. And I knew that my existence was really built on sand. I knew he was a gambler. I knew the game, gamblers play to lose, right? They like the game. And so I just knew that this thing may not end up okay in the end, despite promises of trust funds and some money here and there, and getting my education paid for, things like that. But I knew education was something that could never be taken away from me. So rather than the trips and the this and that, I got an education. And so, he, it just, the guy would just roll the dice and roll the dice and roll the dice. So he finally sold his company in 2008, went public, had $1 billion, and say, "I'm going to do this." And I have 3 siblings. "Oh, you guys all need to get used to a new lifestyle and this and that. And you're going to get this and this and this." And I'm kind of going like, "Show me the money." and the money doesn't get shown. And then he starts offering to buy us some booby prize houses. And then I was like, no, that wasn't the deal. And so I don't play. And then the subprime thing happens and he loses everything,
Mm.
everything, and dies in debt to the IRS. And as I said, I kind of anticipated it, and that's when I made a combat rescue boat and I went into the military industrial complex and my lifeboat became my lifeboat. And and that was the test, right? The test isn't, oh, you got a trust fund, oh, I'm going to go do good things for people and feel better about myself and then go to my beach house on the weekends and the country club and everything else. No, the test is when it all gets pulled, the rug gets pulled out from under you. You got 2 kids, you got no health insurance, nothing. And, my old man was a brutal dude, but I loved him and he was classic. And, he uh, gave me much more than 99% of the world will ever get. So what am I going to whine about? And it's beyond, past about 13 years old, whining about your parents is undignified. And more people should learn, get off the shrink's couch and stop crying about your parents because there's nothing you can do about it now. And revisiting that in this endless loop ain't going to help you, and then don't even get me started on the psychiatric drugs. It's like, oh, I'm depressed, I want to take a pill. It's like, no, you're depressed because you're leading a stupid, meaningless life by choice, and that's very harsh, but there is a kernel of truth to some of that. But anyway, yeah, so that happened. And then I just did, I usually work 2 or 3 jobs, and find a way to do everything. So I wrote tie stick while I was working as a defense contractor. I was still writing newspaper op-eds. Um, and we moved down here to North Carolina, and then I was teaching martial arts and, you know, wasn't the same, it was like, wasn't the same materially. Like I, I don't have great material demands or desires, as long as I'm close to an ocean and I can, eat well and be with my kids and my wife, who I like, and we have fun together, I'm fine. I really don't need much. And so that was the test. And then I taught at the university here for a while. And, it was a joke. It was a summer camp. And the kids were treated like customers. I hadn't taught in a decade. So I came back to teaching. Suddenly the kids are customers we have to pander to. And it's just, I'm getting these anonymous student evaluations and they're holding them over my head at contract time. I've written tons. I've done, academically by all metrics, everything I need to do. And they're not offering me a grown up job, this kind of part time nonsense that I made more money at 18 as a construction laborer. And so I finally said, hey, you know, you either pay me right or I'm out of here. And because I thought, if they can treat me like this, imagine the guy coming out of graduate school with a freshly minted PhD, trying to finish his first book just so he can get on the track to tenure. And so I said, that's it, I'm out of here. And I left. I haven't taught at a university since. I'll be on dissertation committees and this kind of stuff, review books for academic presses. So I still have a little bit of a hand in it. But as a thing, higher education is just in a state of total disarray. And we're not helping the kids. And that's when I set up my foundation. And my foundation is to help independent scholars, independent writers, and defend professors against, like, I've had 2 cases of basically professors refusing to lower their standards and getting student mobs coached by bureaucrats to go after the professors. And it reminds me of the Khmer Rouge, And so I uh I I try to help professors in, some of the truly unjust cases that I see. And there's a surprising number of them. One, recently, um, the president who was the head of Utah Valley University, where Charlie Kirk got shot, she was involved in one of the most horrific cases I was involved in, which was a, 5-time professor of the year, tenured, and, he was accused basically of not lowering his standards and interrogated 7 or 8 times without counsel, and he lost his mind and killed him, committed suicide. And we helped take that case all the way to the 10th Circuit Court, lost on a technicality, but then later somebody sent me all of the emails that that began the investigation, and it was instigated by her nephew. And so I sent those to Utah lawmakers, educational officials, wrote about it on Sour Milk, and she resigned. Whether it was a result of me, Charlie Kirk, I don't really know. I don't really care. But it was just incredibly cruel and inhumane treatment of someone who had dedicated their whole life to an institution and was a really committed teacher. And if we're going to persecute people like that because they're too hard or they're too mean or this kind of stuff, I don't know what this country is going to become, because as you are fond of saying, adversity is the anvil that, I mean, I had incredibly brutal teachers. Like, one of my PhD advisors was Brigadier General Telford Taylor, chief prosecutor at Nuremberg. You think he was nice? And, he was terrifying, and he was never nice to me ever until I got my PhD, and then he'd do anything for me.
Yeah.
So that was the anvil I got pounded on, where they were total pricks to you until you did it, and then it was all over. And that's what I would do when I would teach. I would come in, hand out 3x5 index cards, say, fold it in half, and they're kind of giggling, what's this, arts and crafts? And I'd say, write your name on it. I can't be bothered to know your names. And then they kind of get quiet. And I go, Smith, why are you in here? Oh, what? I said, talk, Smith. Stock tips, sports, talk. And I do it to every student. So by the end of that first class, I got rid of the ones I didn't want in there. And they were bound like Paris Island Marines on, first day of boot camp. And I wanted them all to hate me. And I was the bad guy. And then they finish and they do their thing. And then they come up, oh, Professor Maguire. I said, oh, you can call me Peter now. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, that was an act. Like, that's all. It's like, you're my student. You'll always be my student. Whatever you need from me from here on out, letter of recommendation, it's yours. You did it. Okay. So that's all done. And they're kind of shocked. And I'm still in touch with a lot of my students from, decades and decades ago. And a lot of them have done incredibly well and are powerful people now. And they help me. And that's a great joy,
I first want to say how beautiful and important I think it is how you talk about your parents. Because anyone that knows your stories, what you've shared on your Substack Sour Milk, what you've written about, and hopefully in the memoir you'll write about yourself one day, my goodness, as I mentioned, I think you very well could be the most interesting man alive with all the shit you've done and experienced in your life. So hopefully that comes out one day. But how you talk about them, people could draw their own conclusions about, my goodness, he had a traumatic childhood and all these terrible things happen. We choose how to tell our own stories. And it's very beautiful how you do that with yours. And you focus on all these amazing qualities of both of your parents, all of these great lessons that you learn from them. And we all can do that, even the most adverse of situations. And don't get me wrong, some children have it really terrible. And I'm not saying to flip the most horrific things that happen from terrible people. But if you're still alive today, that's because as a child, someone was looking out for you, and focusing on that and figuring out how to not only tell, but maybe even write your own story, which of all the things you've done, I would imagine first and foremost, you are a professional writer. And like when I think of pros. I have many writers that I love on Substack, as you know, and a lot of us are aspiring writers, but then there's pros out there, and you are absolutely one of them. And you mentioned real quick another one of your roles, the GARC that you created.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm active duty Navy. I work in acquisition, so I understand what it takes for a SIBR not only to create a capability the military is interested in, but to actually transition that capability where it is used operationally. And the time period that you did that in, the story behind creation of that combat rescue vehicle, it is incredible. And I believe like it's an unmanned vehicle that still is being used even potentially right now today.
Yeah.
Remarkable. So cool. But I want to focus
Yeah,
in on, sorry, go ahead.
it was a great team, you know? It was
Yeah.
just a great group. Um it was all incredible, you know, what we call watermen, and that's a cliche now, but really, uh, I would say that, you know, there are a lot of surfers, but there are very few watermen. And the distinction, in my opinion, there are many. Watermen can dive, sail, swim, paddle, kind of all the aquatic arts. But the biggest distinction to me is that the waterman truly takes the mariner's what is it, Mariner's Creed, which is someone is in trouble, you get there as swiftly as you can to help them. And so all of us had saved lives in the ocean. I've saved a few lives in the ocean, people that would be dead today. I know for fact. And and we took that very seriously. And so you know, we saw what the Navy was spending for really inferior products. And at that time, I had friends in naval special warfare, and we just set about making what we knew was much better. And I worked with an old Australian boat designer, remarkable guy named George Greeno, Ivan Trent, one of the original DevGru, Richard Marcinko first selection guys,
Yeah.
an old PJ, and we just had a great team, and we all believed in it, and we had one boat and no budget, and it was terrifying. And yeah, and you know, I had my house as my loan collateral for the line of credit to fund the thing, and you know, got it through NATIC certification, got 3 sole source contracts, and then just it was really death by 1,000 military industrial complex cuts, where it's like, oh, we want this engine, we want the, you know, the end user, you know, like I say, we delivered a Porsche 911 rally car with no air conditioning, you know, built for the Paris Dakar, and they turned it into a Cadillac Escalade with spinner wheels and like little TVs and the headrests and stuff. And so that was pretty sad and pretty hard to watch. And I, you know, I sold it. The company that bought it, you know, they've got it turned into a drone now. I'll be saying more about that shortly. I have to be careful legally what I say. But you know, it's disappointing. It's disappointing to see, you know, the naval special warfares, the guys, the PJs, and like the risks those guys take, and that they could be much better served like by the acquisition process. By, you know, you quickly learn that the endorsement of a DevGru SEAL is much less important than a program manager. And so like we killed the Navy program. So then that put us in a bad place with the Navy, not because we did anything wrong, but he had his pet project and we killed it. And then the PJs became our greatest allies and advocates, and they were amazing. And I didn't know that much about PJs before I started in that, and I was incredibly impressed by them. And so that was, yeah, that was hard, you know, that was hard. That was a lot of floating variables that are outside of your control, you know, like government shutdowns, and, you know, and you got your friends you got to pay.
Yeah.
And they've done, you know, months of work trusting that you're going to pay them. And And I could have made a lot more money if I was a scumbag and I didn't pay my taxes. And I didn't. I paid everything and managed to, pay for my house and survive and do all that. But no, I didn't make much money. I think maybe General Dynamics, L3, the big five, they make a lot of money because they can weather any storm. They can, get the admiral, get to this, get to that. But by the time you get that big contract, you poured so much money into testing and dog and pony shows with this and this exercise, that, and all that stuff is super expensive. And so, like, I was the boat driver, I was the truck driver, I was like, I was the one man band, and I remember being at Little Creek and for the multi-agency small craft conference and some Mr. Admiral hornblower in his big white uniforms walking by, and he sees my boat out of the corner of the eye and he just was like, wow, what's that? And he's really interested. I said, oh, that's this, blah, 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 blah. And he goes, wow, son, what's your company's footprint? I said, well, I got that boat there and just took delivery of that custom trailer. And and he started cracking up, but again, it's like they're not the ones ultimately that help you. It's the program managers. It's that those are the level of guys that really make or break you. So it was interesting. It was like a whole nother world, and not being a military guy, so
And I'm in the Navy, and it is definitely a different world. So it's not a typical duty station I'm in right now. It's a very interesting one, pros and cons to everything. But from my lens, absolutely a success story. But I understand too a lot of the frustration with it and where it ended, based on the original purpose behind it, what it could be used for. And I say time and time again, whether it's acquisition, whether it's my job as an audiologist, our role primarily is to serve the warfighter, to serve the
yeah,
end users. And if that is not the orientation, we're going to fall short somewhere else. Money's, of course, part of it. But if we can consider what is the capability and the need for the end user and make sure that is the priority, now we can talk about cost, schedule, performance, and everything else and make sure we hit those targets. But man, if we get away from that for any other reason, problems start to arise when you have a lot of hands in the pot.
yeah. Like the M4. I mean, I don't know what, like Colt must have, a great deal. Uh, because, in Southeast Asia, I would see every weapon known to man, and, became a big AK fan. But I'm not an expert at that, but it just seemed like, reliability, durability, like all these real important factors in the real world, having something that's high maintenance and yeah, that's why I love Glocks too. They're just so
Right.
crude and simple, and they're not pretty, and they're not, there's so many prettier guns, but they just don't fail.
Yeah.
And so that's, like same with surfboards, cars, all these things. I like, yeah, I like carburetors and naturally aspirated stick shifts. I have a stick shift car still.
Of course you do. That's
It's
awesome.
got a cracked head now though, so my son's driving it very gingerly, so that and we may replace the head gasket. That's the next big family project, so
I want to talk about Fainting Robin
yeah,
Foundation. So that's the
sure.
name of your foundation. I'm first curious, where did the name come from? Is it related to your sister or is that something different?
No, it's a Emily Dickinson poem.
Okay, so it
Um,
is from the Dickinson
yeah,
poem.
but
Okay, I didn't know if there was like an
it
overlap.
sounds so wimpy that it was like good camouflage kinda. It was like, "Oh, the robin fell out of the nest and got picked up and put back in the nest." So, yeah, so I kinda liked it. I was like, "Oh, that's a curveball, like, I'm gonna go with that," and, yeah, and so that was it, but we do help a lot of people, and that not to be too cynical, but that is, yeah, we've done a lot with a very little. Because I am without question the world's worst fundraiser, and I hate doing it. And if I don't like you, I don't really want your money, and so that's limiting. And so, I have some loyal, annual donors and stuff. Some years are better than others. Half the time I go to meet somebody to raise money and I forget to ask for money. So it's not, yeah, it's just that's a different skill set.
The mission behind it, what you've explained already, whether it's helping people legally, promoting, developing writers, mentoring people, it just all of the different aspects of the mission. It's such a beautiful thing considering the experience that you have. You've started promoting, developing writers on Substack and reaching out to them and publishing through Sour Milk as part of the foundation. Tim
Yeah.
W, obviously, we're both a fan of Tim. You
Oh yeah.
chose him to be the first one. I'm
Yeah.
curious, what was it about Tim's writing that drew you into him that made you choose Tim as the first one?
Because his writing is like it's a direct transmission from his experience. I don't think he really realizes the significance of his writing because he's speaking to, in my opinion, probably one of the biggest problems facing the United States moving forward, which is opiates and drug addiction. And he's facing it on the ground level. Um, and having to deliver the kind of bad news I had to deliver doing MIA investigations, telling people who've been wondering about their kid for 20 years what happened, that he's dead and how he died. But that's incredibly important for those families. That enables them to get on with their lives. I mean, I've never seen anything damage families more than having a loved one disappear and not knowing what happened to them, and just they're just gone, and so um and he's like, I think, an opiate overdose investigator, so he's having to talk to like I did in Cambodia. He's talking to perpetrators, he's talking to victims, he's talking to families, and it's just like I said, it's a direct transmission. It's like um it's very powerful and important writing. And I think the idea that we're normalizing opiate addiction, to me, I have a huge problem with that. Like, harm reduction, I think, is the term. And I grew up around drugs. I did a lot of, mostly just pot and hallucinogenics. I didn't like the weasel dust, cocaine, or any of that. I just thought that brought out the worst in people. Um, and the heroin was just beyond the pale. We'd beat you up if you even mentioned it. Like, that was really a no-go thing. I never even heard of people in my world doing it until I went to a fancy college in the East Coast, and it was rich kids from New York City. And it was beyond me. I couldn't believe that they would go near heroin. But the idea, heroin was death and a lifetime of addiction. And the idea that you would play with that lion, I had a good self-preservation instinct. And so now, and then you got the Oxycontin normalizing opiate addiction, the Sacklers getting off the hook, and then the people that are just average people with a broken leg or a back problem from a lifetime of construction, and then suddenly they're going to get a script for Oxy, then they can't afford it, so then they're like, oh, let me get some smack because it's a lot cheaper, and next thing you know, they're gone. They're gone. And then you get fentanyl, which is 100 times worse than any of it, and it just keeps going and going and going. And you have these, where I grew up in LA, there's whole parts of LA that are these, they call them, homeless camps. No, they're drug camps, because there are remedies. You can get housing, but you can't do drugs in that housing. So they're making a choice, and that's their choice, but they're making one. There are other options. And and I have friends' kids who have gone that way, and in the best case scenarios they recover, but they're forever touched by that. That's something they have to guard against the rest of their lives. And so the idea that we allowed that to happen, and it's very complicated because a lot of it has to do with NAFTA, the borders opening up, the cartels being the most sickly, brilliant multinational corporations in the world that are solvent, cash flow, diversified. Um, I mean, what the cartels have done, and we've allowed them to do it to ourselves. That is a national shame, tragedy, and our politicians really are to blame because, I think NAFTA allowed 400% more border traffic to the point where, cars really didn't get checked the way they once did. And then you have Chinese providing the vital chemicals to make the fentanyl. So is that asymmetrical warfare? It looks like it to me. And it always looked like it to me. And, you look at things like chicken processing was once a good union job, and then NAFTA comes. So those jobs, nobody wants to work them now for, pennies compared to what they once got. So what do the cartels do? They send Mexicans to go work in the factories, and then they're selling drugs after an 8-hour shift. So they start infiltrating the heartland, places that didn't have drug cultures. So it's not like me who grew up around drugs that knows that's a no-go, that's a no-go. These are people that don't really understand the problems, and like how once you got that monkey on your back, you got that monkey on your back. And so that to me was just an unspeakable thing to watch. I wrote quite a good screenplay with my good friend Ed Villamy, probably the writer I respect most. He wrote a book called The Mexica, and he was down on the border. He was British Newsman of the Year. He wrote the best book on Bosnia. He wrote Gosh, he's written a bunch of different books, but yeah, his books always come out too soon. Like he's like Cassandra. And so, but he wrote this book of Mexico when the women started disappearing on the border. And and I think that book came out 2005 or something. And he is on to the cartels. He knows everything about it. And so he and I started writing a thing about how ICE early on was involved, kind of, when ICE first came on after 9/11, it kind of was almost like the agency that was created to get around the agency, in the sense that, especially CIA, they have fairly firm rules of engagement. Of course, in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, things got pretty loose, but ICE really ran afoul of the DEA because they were allowing these huge shipments of cocaine into South Florida, and then DEA would go, "Hey, whoa, guys, what's going on?" And they'd say, "Oh no, we got Mr. Big, we got him right in our crosshairs, and we're going to get him." And it was all entangled with like renditions and private planes, and just you couldn't make it up. And so Ed and I wrote that story that again it was too much for Hollywood. It was just too much because why do they like to traffic humans? Because you can only sell drugs once. You can sell humans over and over. So they got deep into that, even in the early 2000s. And so, there's a Swedish journalist named Sven Lindqvist, and he wrote what I think is a pretty remarkable book called what is it? Exterminate the Brutes. And it's just kind of about genocide in the 20th century. But he has kind of a epigram in it, and it's I know enough, you know enough. What we lack is the courage to draw conclusions. And we see that a lot. We see that, hey, a lot of people can't handle me at all. And they're like, "Oh man, you're too intense. You're too this, you're too that," and because I'm not going to waste time. Like you either, you either, you want to get with this program, you want to do it. In order to do it, these are the rules. This is how the game, I played this game. I've succeeded at this game. But you have to know the game you're playing. And a lot of people, they want the adoration of their friends or the respect of their peers or parents or whatever else. That ain't going to get you there, and you got to take your beatings. It took me 8 years to get Law and War published. It probably got rejected by 6 different publishers, 7. And I wasn't wrong. But what I was saying is, um, this kind of, was about the Nuremberg trials and World War II, total war. And I was saying this, the idea that Nuremberg turned Germans into good Democrats and this and that, that's a comforting myth that we tell ourselves. The Marshall Plan turned Germans into good allies and all that. The scare of the Russians coming in through East Germany definitely turned them into good allies and things like that. But no, the Nuremberg trials, it actually turned into a wedge where it drove more moderate Germans together to the ones that were unrepentant Nazis because, they can handle occupation. They can handle military defeat. They can handle total war. Those are part of their DNA going back to the 30 Years' War in the 1600s. What they can handle is having Americans, what they called chewing gum soldiers, come in and try to give them culture and education. And that was the thing that they resented more than anything else. And I had this great German historian that I used to work with named Jörg Friedrich, and he became my big champion. He helped me get Law and War published. He was the best scholar on Nuremberg, best scholar on bombing, and he was this very formal German guy. And we were both historical advisors on this documentary film. And he was also a classical music DJ, and he would point to a new post-war building, and he was like, "Oh, Peter, look at your marvelous building that you Americans built in such stupendous ugliness." And so then I would needle Jurg all the time. I go, "Hey, Jurg, man, I'm going to a concert tonight. You want to come? It's an American icon." Like I'd go into Jeff Spicoli and he'd go, Who?" And I go, "Yeah, his name's Johnny Cash." And he'd go, like, "No, Peter, tonight I shall go home to my flat. I will put the phonograph album on of a great German icon. His name is Ludwig van Beethoven. Have you heard of him?" And I would go, "Yeah, he was that dude in Clockwork Orange." And he would just like, yeah. And yeah, so
Well, as you've demonstrated today, you're exactly the type of writer that I like to seek out. Just like Tim W., you guys are not only people that write on the extremes of possibilities in this life, but it's because you live them or have lived them or definitely still living them, willing to do the hard work, willing not to pull punches when you write your sentences. But at the same time, like you and Tim do so well, like you've talked about with your parents, you've talked about with the people of Cambodia and other areas of your life. You're very curious, interested, and empathetic toward these people. So like
oh yeah,
we tend to define these things as good or bad, but most things are more complex than that. Most things are more nuanced, and that's
very
what I
great.
find from both of your writings. And Tim, by the way, just got promoted black belt New Year's Eve last year.
Oh,
So, a
yeah.
jujitsu overlap as well.
No, he's very compassionate. That's why he's good at his job. And
Yes,
that's why I was good at my job,
yes.
that people talk to me. People have talked to me my whole life. People tell me things they shouldn't tell me. And they always have. And I can usually get people to tell me almost anything. And but I got to tell them something too, right? It's a two-way street. I can't come in and play inspector detector. Like I got to open my kimono too. And so that's the dance. And that's something that can't really be taught easily, because there's this discipline, oral history, and you can go get a degree in it and all that. But if you don't like people and you're not comfortable with people, you're not going to be too good at interviewing. Like academic historians have a lot of trouble with like living sources because they're people. People are messy. People are complicated, and that's a whole different ballgame. You have to, um, and my skill with interviews was always never act surprised by anything they say. And like I interviewed a Khmer Rouge guy who we think killed like 5,000 people with an iron bar. He was one of the executioners in a prison. 20 or 30,000 went in, a couple of dozen survived. And so no one had really gotten him to admit it. And so I asked him like an hour's worth of questions. Oh, what was your earliest childhood memory? Oh, what religion? Oh, what's your favorite food? Just endless questions about nothing. And then at like an hour in, I was like, so how'd you kill the people? Oh, I had him kneel at the ditch and then he was like, oh, and, it was threw him a curveball, but that's, this isn't always a really honest game. I mean, interviewing people when you're trying to get information out of them is manipulative by its nature. And you can write all the rules in the world, about what you should and shouldn't do. But, it's like journalism. Oh, everybody thinks, oh, this guy's a great journalism. That guy's great. The truth is, all of us had these fixers in country that we wouldn't even got out of the hotel lobby without. And they're the ones finding our interviews. They're the ones, softening them up before we go and do our interviews with them. And without those guys, there's no Western journalism. I mean, the best guys I know in journalism are the security guys working for the big papers because they're all former intelligence guys or commandos. Those guys are better reporters than the journalists. It's like they're babysitters, basically. And so by the time that, publication, I don't want to get anybody in troubles, reporter gets to Aleppo or gets to wherever, their security guy's been there 5 times. He's pre-interviewed everybody. And so, and through like the boat, I got in the contractor world, right? And so through that network of French, Australian, British, South Africans, we all know and trust each other. We've all been through a lot of stuff together. So that network, you can find anything out. Like there's always somebody who knows somebody who's there, and you can get pretty much close to the bottom of it, or at least get a very informed picture of the forces at play, of the things that are going on. And that's all built on trust. That's all built on performance. That's all built on there's a German sociologist talks about the world of Umwelt, which is a world of really built on reputation, where you may not know somebody, but you know of them, and their reputation precedes them for better or worse. Like I can get a call from somebody and they can say, hey, my friend's going here. He needs to know about that. Can he call you? Based on the strength of the word of that person calling me, I said, no problem. Have him call me right away. I had a guy call me over the weekend, had a minor legal problem. And, I just said, yeah, you need a good, you need a good lawyer. You need a Saul for this one. And, you did something stupid, but not that stupid. And yeah, let's make it go away, and I offered happily to do that because this is a guy who's done some heavy lifting for our country and is at the tail end of that. And it's not pretty. We don't treat those people the way they should be treated, given what they've done. Even when I'm writing op-eds for papers criticizing the things that they're doing. I mean, that's the irony of my time as a defense contractor. I'm writing for New York Newsday criticizing the war on terror bitterly, making fun of Bush. I'm on the bad person list. I'm working for the defense team of one of the terrorists, the dirty bomber Jose Padilla, not because I liked him, but because I believe that we have a constitution, the guy's an American citizen, and we shouldn't be so frail a society that we have to throw our own standards out the window. We should be strong enough to give the guy a jury trial, let him have a lawyer, do all those things. And instead they put him in a military brig in South Carolina for 2 years. And by the time my friend got to meet him, he had Stockholm syndrome. He was out of his mind. And he was the most lowball Al Qaeda guy, wannabe American prison Muslim, went over there. And basically, I forget which one, but one of the big Al Qaeda guys was like, this guy is so stupid that maybe we can have him turn the gas on an apartment building and blow it up. But then he becomes the dirty bomber, and the Attorney General, I think Ashcroft, he gets up there, oh, we've caught him and he was going to radio out. And it was all total bullshit. And again, we succumb to fear. Fear is crippling. And, you gotta, like, everybody's afraid, like Hickson always says, everybody has fear, everybody's afraid. It's what you do in the face of fear. Then you get to the point you kind of like fear. That fear's your friend. And I got to the point where it was like, if something scared me, I had to do it. And that's just another kind of psyche. Not everybody's like that. Not everybody should be like that. Like my sons, they're night and day. They're totally different. One's quiet and deliberate, really nice. One's just straight ahead Fred, knock it down if it gets in my way, and not quite as nice. And so, and I just, again, you have the stoic amor fati that Marcus Aurelius talks about, but the Buddhists have the same concept, which is acceptance.
Yep.
And the Buddhists had a profound effect on me in my life in seeing people that had survived something so unspeakable, so unimaginable by our standards, yet they were happier than 80% of the rich people I knew in West Los Angeles. I could never take rich people problems that seriously again afterwards. And, I was nominally a rich person for a minute there. And, and, and by universal standards, I'm still, upper middle class and comfortable and all that kind of stuff. But, not in the land of Gulf Streams and private clubs and all that I once got to go experience. But you still can only eat one steak a day. You still put your shoes on one at a time. Nothing changes. You tend to create problems when there are no problems. And so, I really you accept the limits of the possible. You accept, I always kind of dream big, and I'm going to always aim high. Not everybody's like that. Some people want, I see a lot of people in the South and, they got married really young. They've had a same job their whole life. And now, they're retiring and then kids are out and grandkids. And I'm like, wow, that looks pretty good. But I'll probably keel over at this desk. And that's the road I chose. I got to be semi-retired for the first 40 years of my life. So now, no, and that's okay. It was worth it. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. So
it's hard to do anything well disingenuously. And if you are anything, you are for sure a genuine man. And the choices that you've made for the reasons that you've made it, and then how you talk about it now just shows how genuine you are. Peter, I could talk to you all day. And I hope we get to talk many more because we've only scratched the surface. I'll definitely include Jocko's podcast with you where you dive into some of those experiences in Thailand, Cambodia, and other
I got to tip my hat to Jocko, okay? Say what you will about Jocko. That guy did his homework, and
Sure
and he did one of the best interviews. I've been interviewed by Leonard Lopate, all these fancy New York people and stuff. Jocko was the most prepared interviewer who's ever interviewed me, and it was really fun. And I like Jocko. He impressed me. He's a serious person, and and I think it's funny, because my son drinks his Jocko juice. And I just, I think people, they see one side of him, but he's actually a very smart guy.
Absolutely.
And more than anything, he was incredibly diligent, and that impressed me a lot. So,
Yeah, and the forward for your book. So it's
yeah,
cool to see the overlap there.
yeah,
But
yeah.
this has been such an honor. I look forward to
Oh, no
continuing to
problem.
connect, collaborate. Peter, thank you so much.
Okay, no problem at all.
Remember, all the knowledge in the world means little unless you uniquely apply it to your life. Challenge yourself to take action. Knowledge applied is wisdom earned. Determine what is important to you and get after it with intention, effort, and consistency. Until next time, stay resilient, my friends.